Due to the graphic nature of this program, parental discretion is advised.
Get emergency for you. Lost number 2 engine coming down real fast.
We all have a lot of questions when it comes to airline travel.
Let's take a look at reality. In the last year, the aviation industry has been battered by a series of disasters. 10 major incidents and 5 devastating crashes have thrust aviation safety onto the front page.
December 20th, an American Airlines flight 965 careens into a Colombian mountain. 160 people perish. February 6th, 189 passengers and crew on a Turkish airline are plunged into shark-infested waters off the Dominican Republic. February 29th, a Boeing 737 crashes and burns in Peru. Again, no survivors. April 3rd, another fatal accident. The military version of the Boeing 737 crashed into a hillside in Croatia, killing 35 people, including Commerce Secretary Ron Brown.
May 11th, even more terror, this time on American soil. The shocking crash of ValueJet Flight 592. The 27-year-old DC-9 took off from Miami carrying 110 people on a routine trip to Atlanta. Also on board, more than 100 potentially dangerous oxygen canisters in the cargo hold. Part of a low-fares, no-frills airline, this ValueJet flight was no bargain. In the air for less than 6 minutes, pilots on the doomed flight radioed a desperate plea. The plane was rapidly filling with smoke.
592 days later, return to Miami.
These were among the last words from the flight crew to the control tower.
Smoke in the cabin, smoke in the cabin. Roger. Center 592, turn left heading 140.
The plane just went like this to like that, and once it got on its side, it just went, you know, about a 70, 75 degree angle straight into the ground.
The ValueJet disintegrated into the muck of the Florida Everglades.
We are hearing there are no survivors. We are hearing there are absolutely no survivors.
Hampered by a remote location and thick mud that literally swallowed the plane, recovery efforts took close to a month. But investigators quickly focused on the oxygen canisters as the possible source of the fire.
As we're about to find out, any number of things can go wrong when you fly. And when something does, there may be no worse way to die.
Because the bodies were so badly mangled in the impact, the medical examiner here says he's unsure if he'll ever be able to identify each passenger.
There was a tremendous explosion in a whirlwind, tornado, throughout the entire airplane.
My first thought was, oh my gosh, this isn't an emergency. It's the worst crisis possible.
My first realization, and to be honest, is that you're probably going to die this afternoon.
When we hit the water, I felt myself blacking out, and I never expected to regain consciousness.
Fathers grabbed for their children, husbands grabbed for their wives. It was absolute stark terror.
Over and over, we hear that flying is the safest way to travel. Based on the number of people who fly each year in the U.S., your chances are 3 million to 1 that a major carrier or commuter crash will kill you. Those are pretty great odds. But tell that to the hundreds of passengers who went down on these devastated planes.
When you as a passenger hand that ticket to the flight attendant and take your seat in the rear of one of those airplanes, you are absolutely, totally out of control of your future and your fate. You totally turn over responsibility for your life or your death to the hands of the airlines and their pilots.
ValueJet is grounded as of midnight.
Subsequent to the accident and the 30-day special investigation that just occurred, we have turned up a number of issues which caused us to take this today.
In the case of ValueJet, the FAA speculates that the airline may have grown too fast and cut corners to provide low fares.
A preliminary FAA report on ValueJet had noted missing manuals, confused mechanics, and lack of maintenance quality control as some of the airline's operational problems.
The FAA, which was quick at first to defend ValueJet, now faces a major internal shakeup over their handling of the upstart airline.
We may not just have a ValueJet problem here, we may also have an FAA problem.
In Collision Course, a book Ralph Nader co-authored on airline safety, he says safety often takes a back seat to airline economics and government politics.
Aviation safety is like a rubber band. You know, the risks increase and nothing happens. The risks increase and nothing happens. And then at some point, snaps. We don't want to get to that point.
As we get into the future, we're going to see accidents happening almost every week in our newspapers, major catastrophes.
When I regained consciousness, we were sinking and the water in the aircraft was about up to my nose.
I was engulfed in the flames, and I knew that I was in fire.
Everything that wasn't tied down was airborne. It was as loud as laying under a train on a track when the train's going over. You couldn't hear yourself scream.
Once you hit the ground, you literally have seconds before the cabin is engulfed in this thick smoke. And when I say thick, you can barely see your hand in front of your face, and you can't breathe.
I was in intensive care. I almost died the first night. And my wife and son, youngest son, got there, and I said, "What about everybody else?" And her big blue eyes filled up with tears, and she started crying. She said, "Not everybody made it."
These people all lived through the absolute horror of a crash. But what went wrong? Why couldn't they beat the odds? Why did their planes go down? Each of these survivors was a victim for a very different reason. Next, you'll see how and why planes crash, and learn ways you can avoid stepping on a jet that may end up a fiery wreck. Also, listen to this spine-chilling recording. Are pilots being rushed to takeoff before they're ready? Coming up, 2 airline tragedies that might have been prevented.
Up the ramp they go. This trip is going to be fun. The motors are starting. Fasten seatbelts. Look, we're starting to take off. And then up, up into the air.
We'd all like to think flying on an airliner is one big joyride. But it's essential that everyone around that plane works as a team. If any one person makes a mistake, it can be the beginning of the end.
Clear to go, Northwest.
Northwest Flight 255 started out like just about any other. It was 1987, a clear August day in Detroit. A plane load of passengers was urged to quickly take their seats. The pilots may have been in a rush to get the MD-80 jet into the air. One reason could be the 11 p.m. noise curfew at Southern California's John Wayne Airport, their final destination.
So far, that's approved.
The pilots started down the runway unaware their wing flaps weren't down. That meant this plane had no chance of flying.
Stall.
156 people died, including 4 infants, as the plane clipped light poles, smashed into a rental car building, and burst into flames on the freeway.
And he just started banking left and right. There's this big wall of fire.
The chief cause of accidents continues to be human error, very often crew error in the cockpit.
Tim Neal is a spokesman for the Air Transport Association, which represents the major air carriers. Airlines don't like to see their planes go down in flames.
Some of those problems are difficult to solve when you're talking about human failure. You know, why did somebody screw up? Why did they forget to do something? Why did they compound the error? The key new thing I think that we're going to see in the years ahead is the monitoring of pilot performance during flight, an analysis of that so we can see where we need to do some more work.
Many studies say that more than 6 out of 10 crashes are primarily the fault of the flight crew, the people flying the plane. According to the National Transportation Safety Board report, the probable cause of that Northwest tragedy was a failure to perform some of the most basic cockpit procedures. But only a year later, it happened again. Same problem, different airport. This time in Dallas, 3 pilots of Delta 1141 also forgot to set their flaps because they were chatting with a flight attendant. In this ironic twist, the black box recording foreshadows the tragedy to come.
Discuss about the dating habits of our flight attendants so we can get it on the recorder, you know, in case we crashed, and the media would have some kind of a juicy tidbit. Is that right? Oh, is that what they're looking for? Yeah, you know that Continental that crashed in Denver? Did you read that? Yeah, they were talking about the dating habits of one of the flight attendants. We got to leave something for our wives and children to listen to. Tower set. Engine estimates look good. Airspeed coming up both sides. 80 knots. Just failure. We got an engine failure. We're going to take it. 141.
The screams of passengers could be heard on the recording as the Boeing 727 hit the ground tail first and erupted in a fireball. 13 people died. All 3 pilots survived. What we've just seen is 2 cases of serious pilot error. But sometimes, it's the skill and determination of a good pilot that's responsible for saving the lives of many passengers. There's no better example of that than United Airlines Flight 232.
On 232, we were flying along on this beautiful July Wednesday afternoon, the last day of a 4-day trip for our crew.
Jan Brown-Lohr was a flight attendant on the DC-10 jet. She was heading home to Chicago July 19th, 1989.
And just out of the blue, this loud explosion, which was our number 2 engine.
The cockpit announcement was we had shut down the number 2 engine and would be a few minutes late arriving at O'Hare.
United Captain Denny Fitch began his journey as a passenger on Flight 232. Just outside of Sioux City, Iowa, the back engine exploded, cutting off all steering controls. The pilots were suddenly flying a plane that was, in layman's terms, like a car with no steering wheel and no brakes. The wide-body jet could fly on the remaining engines, but it couldn't be controlled and it couldn't land. Denny Fitch got out of his seat and went to the cockpit on a mission. What he saw was a captain and his crew in a life-or-death struggle.
I said, would you like me to do the throttles? To which he agreed, and for the next 30 minutes I began my own research laboratory. And I was ready to die if necessary. The next thing that came to my mind was a flight instructor I had years ago. And he basically taught me, never give up. Never, ever give up. And so with that mindset, I went to work for the next 30 minutes and tried to tame the beast.
The following is an animated dramatization of the DC-10 crash using the actual black box recording and pilot dialogue.
Okay, there you go. Left throttle, left.
The runway was in our sights. We had it lined up. That we were traveling so fast. We were traveling 250 miles an hour.
And let's get control of this airplane. We're going to put it down wherever it happens to be. He's coming down real fast. Okay, all right, he's going down. There, he's down on fire.
You could not have imagined how hard we hit. It was absolutely incredible. I blacked out, and there was shrieking metal, noises that I had never heard or have heard since.
The 400,000-pound plane splintered like a matchstick and set off an orange fireball that was seen for miles. Miraculously, 184 people lived through this unbelievable crash.
The people I think about every morning when I step out of the shower and I see the scars on my body. And I think about both survivors and those that died. The 112 are in one seat, and the 184 that lived are in the other. And at all costs, I have to keep both seats out of the dirt every day. Some days are better than others, that's all.
United lost one in Sioux City, and the pilot saved a lot of lives, landed an airplane that had no control capability whatsoever. The amazing thing is when they put all the instructors and the test pilots in the simulator and duplicated it, they all crashed and they couldn't do that. It's an amazing thing.
Coming up later in the program, the showdown over child safety seats that might have saved the life of little Evan Sow. Ever been to an antique air show? Go to any major airport, because airlines in the U.S. have the oldest fleets of planes in the Western world. Did you know the average age of a Boeing 727 that's still flying is over 22 years old? That's the average. The 727 you fly tomorrow could be 30 years old. That means it was made in 1966.
I think people are entitled to know how old the aircraft that they're traveling in is and how many departure and arrival landings there have been in order to determine whether these aging aircraft should be retired by the airline companies.
Air travel can only be as safe as the plane itself. And for most of us, it's a marvel these metallic dinosaurs can even get off the ground. Industry giant Boeing has been having a bumpy ride lately. Since December, the reliable 757 has had 2 ghastly accidents. And the 737, the most popular 2-engine commercial jet in history, is suspect after 2 unsolved catastrophes.
We have 2 accidents presently, Colorado Springs and Pittsburgh, both involving the same type of aircraft.
NTSB Chairman Jim Hall runs the agency charged with pinpointing the cause of every crash and then recommending safety policies.
I'm not satisfied that the 737 is still flying today, and we have not had implementation of the recommendations out of the Pittsburgh crash.
In the Pittsburgh and Colorado Springs crashes, both 737s went down in clear weather, just dropped out of the sky. The death toll, 157 people. And then since February, another 2 crashes. A 737 went down in Peru, killing 123. And our country mourned the loss of some of its brightest leaders when a military version of the 737 went down on April 3rd, killing all on board. Boeing declined our request for an interview, but we did speak with David Hinson, head of the FAA. He has the authority to ground a plane if it's deemed unsafe.
If you take all of the flight hours and all of the accidents, it's still one of the very safest airplanes in the air, so it's safe.
Investigators still don't know why the 737s are going down. And here's another case of a plane still flying where they do know why it's crashed. The ATR-72. For some, not enough is being done to fix this plane.
It is a devastating scene. There is a small crater there, and the wreckage is strewn in a fairly close radius around the impact site.
Massive destruction of this.
Halloween, 1994. 64 passengers board American Eagle Flight 4184 and fly into a freezing Midwest rainstorm. If only they'd been informed that their plane, an ATR-72, has a history of problems in icy weather. Many of those people, maybe all of them, might have gotten off the ill-fated flight. The following is a dramatization using actual flight data and pilot transcripts from Flight 4184.
Hello, Eagle, Flight 184. Should be about 10 minutes until you cleared in.
No, I can double check on that. Just sent a message to dispatch. And 10 more minutes, she said. Whoa! I know we do that. I'm trying to keep it at 180. Oh. Whoops. Okay. Man. Oh. No, it's okay. It's all right, man. Okay, mellow it out. Okay. Autopilot's disengaged. Okay, okay. Nice and easy.
After the crash, some pilots actually walked off the job rather than fly the ATR-72 in icy conditions. Steve Frederick is one of the pilots who lost his job.
This is not going to happen again. If I lose my career, the truth would come out about the ATR.
The problem with the ATR-72 is ice. It builds up on the wings. The plane can then nosedive towards the ground, as it did in 2 crashes and a number of close calls.
We were almost instantaneously confronted with an aircraft that went from perfectly flyable, perfectly controllable, right on the beam, to an aircraft that was almost out of control and was trying to, frankly, kill us.
The FAA did ground the planes in bad weather, but the manufacturer added larger de-icing boots and did some additional testing. Now you can again fly an ATR-72 in the worst weather conditions. Here's the ticket to prove it. The same route taken during the devastating crash in Roselawn, Indiana. But is the plane safe?
That airplane is very safe today. Because of some data that we were able to collect as a result of the accident in Indiana, it's just fine.
In its final report released last week, NTSB investigator Greg Fife stated, this airplane is safe based on the awareness that the flight crews have, the operators have, and the industry has now.
Alan Brodeen, the president of AIR Marketing, is confident the plane poses no risk. Quote, after extensive icing tests conducted by ATR, a combination of procedures and modifications implemented on the fleet since June 1995 have resulted in the highest level of safety. These planes had no incidents throughout the very extreme icing conditions of the 1995-96 winter.
As long as the ticket agents give them the go-ahead to get on that airplane, passengers get on them without a second thought. And I think that people should start having second thoughts. Take a look at where they are placing their behinds.
And while we're at it, we should watch where we're landing. Another factor in the risk equation is the safety of the airport.
Pilots look at LaGuardia in New York as a real challenging airport. They say that you need a sort of a fighter pilot mentality to come into LaGuardia because there's a steep angle of approach and there's short runways, and Flushing Bay is sitting right at the end of the runways.
We're slowly coming down in altitude. We're having to make these turns right around all these buildings, monuments.
Another difficult approach is Washington, D.C.'s National Airport, rated the most challenging by pilots in a Condé Nast poll.
It's very unusual because you're coming down this river and you're looking out over here for the airport, following visual points on the ground, and your attention is really diverted away from flying the airplane.
At many airports, including National and John Wayne in Orange County, California, local regulations are in place to reduce jet noise.
Okay, as we come up to 1,500 feet, reduce thrust to the minimum available for level flight.
1,500 feet.
Which hopefully will reduce the noise.
That changes the way a pilot can fly the plane. At John Wayne, steep angles for takeoffs and landings create a wild ride.
National and John Wayne, they're by far the worst. They're an accident looking for a place to happen.
We pull back the thrust of the engine to reduce the noise. Now, no pilot really likes to do that.
We have to ask ourselves, is a quiet neighborhood more important than passenger safety?
The problem that I have is everybody wants electricity, but nobody wants the power company in their backyard. When you get on an airplane, you'd like to walk 5 minutes to the airport instead of drive an hour.
But is convenience more important than safety? It seems like commuter airports are everywhere. And guess what? They're not as safe as you might think. They can be tricky for landings and sometimes lack the latest safety equipment. Also, they're often serviced by commuter airlines with the most questionable planes and the least experienced pilots.
We've had a rash of commuter accidents.
You've probably seen or flown a commuter before. The small planes make convenient short jumps to smaller cities. But what you probably didn't know is that the crash rate of commuter airlines is twice that of larger commercial jets. And don't be fooled by names like United Express or Delta Connection. Commuter airlines are not necessarily owned, operated, or overseen by major airlines.
We did hearings on commuter airline safety a few years ago. I mean, I had any number of pilots who wanted to talk to me privately in my office, on the telephone, you know, in a parking lot somewhere to tell me that this is a disaster waiting to happen.
Commuter and regional airlines often hire entry-level pilots with less training and less experience than major carriers.
They're being paid less than, you know, taxi drivers in many cases. They're required to have fewer hours of training than a beautician in the state of Oregon. You know, there's something wrong with this picture.
Recognizing the problem, the FAA is planning to unveil sweeping new regulations that it hopes will increase commuter airline safety. Next up, you may be surprised to learn just how unsafe your child can be on an airplane. But first, the plain truth about United 811. In 1989, the 747 had climbed to 23,000 feet when a faulty cargo door became loose, blowing out a 20-foot hole in the plane. 9 people flew into the night sky. At least one went directly into the turbine engine. Bruce Lampert was one of the lucky passengers who survived.
United 811 was every air passenger's worst nightmare.
It could be your nightmare. That same United jet is back, flying passengers over the Pacific. We found that repaired 747 at San Francisco International Airport, certified to fly. Would you buy a ticket?
You would have to fly a flight every day for over 5,000 years to be assured statistically of being in a fatal accident.
That statistic may be true based on the sheer numbers of passengers flying. But look at this map. Each dot is an aircraft flying over the United States. There are thousands of planes in the air at any given time. Somewhere in the world, there's an engine fire, emergency landing, or near miss almost every single day. So why do planes go down? Can it be fixed? The head of the FAA, David Hinson, thinks so. He's publicly declared a goal of 0 accidents.
I do believe that we can reach 0 accidents for extended periods of time and probably somewhere out in the future get to 0 accidents. I really believe that can happen.
Representing the major air carriers is Tim Neal.
The 0 accident rate is a very, very lofty goal. There's no doubt about that. Because it means that you're going to have to eliminate all human error. And there's severe weather conditions, too, that are unforeseen in many cases.
Tonight, a sudden but severe thunderstorm. The jumbo jet was carrying 160...
Delta Airlines.
The type of accident the industry hopes to avoid is Delta Flight 191. The 1985 crash was an imperfect combination of human error and extreme weather that brought a plane raining down from the sky.
Down real hard. We've seen lightning strike, but we don't know if it hit the plane or not.
It's also become an example of how the government and industry came together to help prevent similar tragedies.
Landing check complete.
Okay, thank you.
This stuff is moving in.
We're going to get our airplane watched.
Well, I've got lightning to the right there, Bill.
Yeah, I see lightning coming out of that one straight in front of us.
What?
There's lightning coming out of that one.
Where?
Right ahead of us.
As the Lockheed L-1011 descended below 1,000 feet, the pilots flew into an enormous black storm cloud.
You're going to lose it all of a sudden. There it is. Push it up. Push it way up. Way up. Way up.
Okay, we're losing airspeed. But
I don't know if this is stable. Oh,
okay, there you go. Push up. Way up. Push it up. Way up.
The crew didn't know they were caught in treacherous wind shear conditions until it was too late.
Pull up. Pull up.
Push it up, Max.
Pull up. Pull up.
The plane clipped a car on a freeway, decapitating the 20-year-old driver, then skidded onto the airfield, exploding in flames. Since this horrific tragedy, the FAA has installed detection radar in several airports and in many planes. Also established, mandatory pilot training for wind shear. But the question remains, why did it take an accident to make the improvements? FAA critics say the agency often has to count tombstones before they act.
The FAA is a dinosaur bureaucracy with a very primitive nervous system. If you hit it in the nose in January, the tail moves in December. The only thing that motivates that primitive bureaucracy called the FAA is blood. Many, many instances have been documented where the FAA has identified a problem. They put together a study group to analyze the problem. They work with the industry to try to solve the problem. And while that committee is meeting and pouring coffee and eating donuts, an accident happens and people are killed. As soon as those people are killed and that blood has been spilt, then the FAA issues a change, a modification or a rule that solves the problem. But the only thing that seems to motivate the FAA in this country is when people die.
That's exactly what some air traffic controllers are saying about the petrifying breakdowns and blackouts of their antiquated system.
It absolutely reduces the margin of safety. We shouldn't have to wait until we have a mid-air collision to say that was unsafe.
If they don't deal with the critical breakdowns of the air traffic control system, all it takes is 1 or 2 mid-air collisions between 2 large airliners, and we will have the worst aviation death toll in American history.
Clear 3. 451 approved.
I don't know that it is criminal, but at best it's immoral what has happened in this country in the air traffic control system. It's just it's a disgrace, absolute disgrace.
These IBM 9020Es are the equipment controlling air traffic at Chicago Center, the world's busiest air corridor. The technology is so old that a 15-foot bank of the old IBMs have less power than this tiny computer chip. The bulky mainframe computers have so many outdated parts that it's nearly impossible to find technicians trained to fix them.
To be perfectly honest with you, the system is strained that it seems from coast to coast. Radar has failed in Tampa, Atlanta, Phoenix, Los Angeles, Seattle, Pittsburgh, Washington. It is a coast-to-coast epidemic of 30 and 40-year-old equipment which is failing.
It is true that there are parts of this system that are old and need to be replaced. It is also true that the FAA has been slow and not managed as well as it should have been in the context of some parts of the air traffic control system. But it is unfair and inaccurate to indict the whole system because some parts of it have not been managed in terms of modernization.
We shouldn't have to be in the foxhole this long without a supply plane. We need help.
The air traffic system is a complicated problem, but at last the FAA is making great strides to fix it. But there is another problem, one that needs only common sense to solve. I am a mother of a young child, and this really strikes a chord with me. Why do we continue to allow infants to fly without being restrained in child safety seats?
We bolt down the coffee pots, put away the glasses, tuck your carry-on bag under the seat in front of you securely, but just hold your baby on your lap. And I think a lot of passengers think, well, gee, if the airline tells me it's okay and the government tells me okay, it must be safe.
The last 15 years, 48 million infants have flown in their laps, to and under, and laps of parents in the United States. There have been 10 fatalities, as I recall. I think I'm correct. Maybe 8 of those were non-survivable in any case. 2 may have survived in child restraint systems, but only may have. There's no absolute proof.
Here's a woman who saw one of those babies just before he died. Flight attendant Jan Brown-Lohr believes she has proof the child could have been saved. Little Evan Sow was traveling to Chicago on his mother's lap. During emergency landing preparations for United Flight 232, the boy was placed on the floor. This is standard procedure just before a crash. When the plane hit the ground, Evan shot off like a missile, 15 rows across the plane.
2 children went off that way. One was very, very fortunate. An overhead bin opened, and she flew into it, and it shut and saved her life. But the other little boy, the 22-month-old boy, was not as fortunate.
If we were to mandate child safety seats, we would push millions of people back into their automobiles with their children. I've heard people say, well, who wouldn't buy a seat for their children? A lot of people. A lot of people cannot afford that extra money who fly today.
It is simply not safe, and I cannot fathom just hanging it all on finances. To me, when I see children sitting on laps, it's a game of Russian roulette. You probably will be lucky, but I am here to tell you, I came face to face with a woman who lost.
You'll hear this a lot from passengers. They say, well, if I'm in a plane crash, my number's up. But that's not true. That's one of the biggest myths in air travel today. About 80% of accidents involve forces that your body can withstand. That means 80% of accidents are survivable.
This program has changed the way I'll fly from now on. The most important lesson I've learned is how to be a survivor.
You can improve your odds of surviving a survivable accident if you know what to do and you know how to get out.
Geraldine Prenkowski now heads up the Aviation Consumer Action Project after surviving the terror of U.S. Air Flight 1493. Touching down in Los Angeles, the 737 landed on top of a commuter plane and burst into flames. Scott Vaughn also survived that crash.
By the time we had skidded down the runway and hit the building, the plane was completely engulfed, and there was mad chaos.
Out of the survivable airline accidents, the 79% of the people that die, the majority of them die from smoke inhalation. The more you breathe it, the worse your chances of surviving are.
For the last 14 years, Charlie Chittum has been improving crash survivability with tests like these, conducted at the Civil Aeromedical Institute in Oklahoma City.
I'd say the 3 most important factors to getting you off an aircraft in a state of distress are speed and speed and speed.
Every time you fly, follow these 5 essential steps recommended by aviation safety experts. Here's number 1. There is no safest seat. Every crash is different. However, your best bet is an aisle seat on or near an exit row.
When I settle in an aircraft, I sit in the center of the aircraft at an overwing exit, and that is structurally the strongest part of the aircraft, probably the last part of the aircraft to disintegrate in an accident.
It's also essential to count the rows to all the nearest exits. In an accident, you may not be able to see the exits and will have to feel your way, row by row, out of the plane. On takeoffs and landings, pull your seatbelt low and tight, so tight it may even hurt a little. The reason is to avoid what experts call submarining.
That'll cause you to slide right down through the belt while it's tied. It could catch you under the shoulders here and dislocate your shoulders. If you slide through there, it could catch you under the neck and break your neck.
If you're one of the jaded flyers who ignores the pre-flight safety briefing and information cards, that could be a big mistake.
I do this for a living, and before I fly on any airplane, before the aircraft ever leaves the jetway, I've probably read that briefing card 10 times. If you read and train and read and train and read and train, when the situation arises, you can get up and do it just like that, no problem.
Most importantly, don't take your carry-on bag when you have an evacuation. I was just at a cabin safety conference and I heard of a precautionary evacuation at Kennedy where a fellow came down the slide carrying a stuffed swordfish.
I don't own a material possession worth losing my life over, and I'm quite sure that you don't own one worth killing me over.
And finally, what we wear on a plane could help us survive a fire.
I would recommend wearing natural type fabrics. Keep as much as your exposed skin covered as possible.
Wool and cotton with tight weaves retard fire. No shorts, no high heels. Wear hard-sole lace-up shoes so they won't slide off on impact. You may need shoes to run through glass, twisted metal, and even burning fuel.
If you had a bushy head of hair and you had hairspray on it, and one of those little molten polycarbons of fire came down and hit you on the head, you'll get an instant haircut.
And here's something all women need to remember. Never wear pantyhose or nylon stockings on a flight.
Pantyhose, nylon stockings, and things like that have a very low melting point. And if you start generating heat, they could melt on your skin and create severe burns on your skin.
We conducted a test on pantyhose to demonstrate how quickly they melt and burn in the type of flash fire often encountered in a crash. Within seconds, the stockings fused to the simulated latex skin of the mannequins. Flight attendant and crash survivor Jan Brown-Lohr is all too familiar with this phenomenon.
My nylons were the most lethal piece of clothing on my body. They melted to my skin. I had second and third degree burns on my ankles. Those nylons were deadly, and they are very painful.
The irony is that most airlines require female flight attendants to wear nylon stockings as part of their uniform. Once again, the 5 tips that may save your life. Ask for an aisle seat near an exit row and count the seat backs all the way to the exits. Buckle up tight and always keep your seatbelt on during a flight. Pay attention to all of the safety instructions. Dress properly for flights. And remember, in an emergency, save yourself, not your baggage. Every single one of these 5 safety steps is something that we as passengers have control over. We don't have to be afraid of flying, just prepared.
It's a very safe way to travel, but safety is really a dynamic thing. Just as aircraft technology and traffic patterns are changing, safety is something that requires constant vigilance. What's safe today isn't safe tomorrow.
The whole safety of these systems will depend on how informed and how demanding airline passengers are.
Passengers own the system. They pay for everything, from air traffic control down to the runways. And so they really should feel entitled and, in some sense, obligated to participate in the system and demand the highest level of safety.
Coming up next, more information that could save your life. When we started this program, we asked a simple question. Why do planes go down? What we've learned is that there are no simple answers to this complex issue. But we do hope this program is opening some eyes about air travel. Our purpose is not to discourage anyone from flying, but to encourage everyone, including the airlines, to fly safer. We've already heard from the experts, but here's our own personal list of safety tips. When you book a ticket, know what kind of plane you're flying. Know when to fly. If possible, avoid heavy traffic times, congested airports, and bad weather. Look carefully at safety and maintenance records of airlines. You may have to dig a little on this one, but it's very important. Ask your travel agent, read magazines, write your congressman if that's what it takes. Demand answers. After all, your safety should be your priority. I'm Gillian Anderson. Thanks for watching.